the video and we'll call the roll.
By the way, Drew, that's a great virtual background you have.
Senate Appropriations Committee, February 23rd. Senator Guru.
Here.
Senator Hicks.
Here.
Senator Kinski.
Here.
Senator Steinmetz.
Here.
Chairman Perkins.
Also here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. We have 4 bills on our agenda today. From our discussions with the Vice President, he's got to leave for a meeting early here. And so we'll take a little bit out of order. I don't think that many of these will take very long, but why don't we take, instead of going in the order we've got, we're going to pull up and deal with, I think it's
79, Medicaid billing.
Yeah, Senate File 79, Medicaid for school-based services. And so with this, what I would do, if it's okay, this bill is an outgrowth of the efficiency study. It was one of the recommendations that came out. I went back this morning and looked and found some of the efficiency, my efficiency notes. If I can find those. Yeah, so the when we did these, just a couple things. One of the things that happened, one of the things that the Alvarez and Marcel consultants had was that they recognized that the state receives 1.2% of its funding from special education funds, which is well below the average of 1.9%. These funds have the special education funds are growing faster and outpacing any other that faster than the overall district spends. It complicates it. It runs like a lot of things. It's on a just continues to increase faster than enrollment, faster than other costs. And the state is, the state is Wyoming is the only state that doesn't receive reimbursement from Medicaid for school-based services. When they went back and looked, their estimate was that on school-based services that in a biennium, you could say between $6 to $12 million by obtaining and having special Medicaid, having these special education funds to the extent we can reimburse by Medicaid. And the belief was that we all are familiar with the level of maintenance efforts that are required by federal government. So you can't just supplant, but as those continue to grow, I think that there's a continuing opportunity to surpass the $6 to $12 million that over time have that be even more significant. So what this does is it goes back, which was a recommendation of the Alvarez and Marcel people, and they talk about the guts of it's right there on page 2 in the red. You look about you include the actual amount expended by the district during the previous year for reasonable administrative costs to bill for authorized Medicaid services under section H of this section. It talks about there, and then it goes on bottom of page 2 and down through on 3. They're talking about each school district that has more than 25 Medicaid eligible students. That was kind of the threshold that where we want them to participate in this. Department of Health shall provide the payment. Ultimately, what happens is they'll expand, they'll be reimbursed, and then when we get the reimbursement, it'll come back, and thereby, and because you have to spend and it's a reimbursement, so you spend up front and get reimbursed later. You have down the types of services that we believe are authorized and that we can receive Medicaid reimbursements for are identified, listed on page 4. Then we have in section 2, we're instructing the Department of Health to go and make the necessary changes to the state Medicaid plan or any necessary waiver that's required under this for this to obtain this. And then it recognizing that there's going to be some support necessary for school districts in the Department of Ed. We have some there's some appropriations we find in section 3 and section 4. The 57,000 is and change is appropriated to the I believe the Department of Education, and then the 414,000 from the School Foundation Program, Department of Health, and they'll oversee and help obtain the reimbursement of that as it goes forward. But in my mind, that's you have to spend, that's which right in line. Our Marcel and Alvarez consultants said that you spend somewhere between 350 to 500,000. It'll take that investment to get the $6 million to $12 million that they thought you could have in cost savings. And we visited, my anticipation, we visited with the superintendent in the past, and she's supportive and ready to move forward and helping with this, as is the Department of Health. So that's what I know about the bill, and my recognition of what I remember about the bill and the work we did on the Efficiency Commission. So with that, if there's any questions, if there's not, we'll see it. Is there anybody for public comment, Karen?
In right now.
Thank you, Jesse. We got Jesse and Gayle. So Gayle, how are you doing? I haven't seen you for a while. Are you there, Gayle? Well, we'll go. We recognize Jesse. Jesse, can you hear me? All right.
Chairman Perkins, I can.
Go ahead, Jesse. What do you have for us today?
Jesse Springer with the Wyoming Department of Health. I work in the Medicaid part of healthcare financing division. So just available for questions. We worked with education on an amendment that was, I believe, submitted to the committee, which would, I think it should some of the funding and actually reduced one of the positions needed.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have that proposed amendment. It's an email from Franz Fuchs, Fuchs. It's dated Friday, February 19.
Okay. Thank
If you're
you.
looking for it in your email, and I wonder if Jesse, so you're shifting a position. If I understand it, you're shifting the costs directly onto the Medicaid program. Is that correct?
Chairman Perkins, Senator Kinski, that's correct. The thought of, after our discussions with education, if we did all the administration, there's still going to be some administration education, but they thought they could absorb a small amount of it. But if we did the majority of this administration, which is being funded here under Medicaid, we could receive federal match for the administration of the program. So that was what we were suggesting, so that we would have one position. Currently, I don't believe the bill funds a position. It funds a position, but doesn't create a position. So it's something we were requesting, but then the rest of the administration costs, so there's contractual costs here and other things. We believe we can get federal match for those at a minimum of 50% federal match. And in some of these cases, we could possibly get higher match rate for different things that are technology related.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Kinski.
I just want to ask Karen, do you have a copy of that email with the amendment language in it?
Have received it. I don't have access to it right now.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And just looking at the fiscal note, Jesse, there was a $57,085 from the $57,085 from the general fund. There was $114,080 from the School Foundation Program. And then there was a match of $114,080 in federal funds. And so I guess your amendment is carrying that concept forward, but revises those numbers a little bit.
Chairman Perkins, it does. So what we took was, what it ends up doing is actually reducing the school foundation or general funds by 28,000 by, if you follow the amendment through.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so it shifts, it spends this basically the same amount of money, but it spends more money from the federal side.
Okay.
And so we thought that was helpful. Hopefully we think it's helpful. And then their education didn't have this position anymore. So this actually had been caught up in a previous round of budget cuts since the last time this bill was considered. So they previously had some funding and they had a position, but they had eliminated that position already. And that's why they suggested just eliminating this remaining funding and shifting the remainder to health to administer the program.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate that and your help on this. Any other questions for Jesse? Thank
Yeah,
you.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Vice President.
Yeah, I just missed that. But so I understand we're getting rid of the position. That's a position in WDA is the one, and I don't have the amendment. And so trying to figure out what we're doing with that position. There was a position in WDA that we were going to transfer, and then there was some funding for position in the Department of Health, I think, in the original bill.
Chairman Perkins, Senator Hicks, the bill's suggesting that you fund one position in the Department of Health. That the amendment is, I'm sorry. The bill is written funds two positions.
Yes.
And what we're suggesting is you not add funding for the Department of Education position, and
Okay.
you only fund the Department of Health position.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
the amendment is written to transfer the remainder to contractual services, which, especially in the startup of this program, there'll be actuarial and accounting type services and training. So we'll be training school districts. That'll be the primary expenses is, in the long run, the administration of this will be the staff member and training the districts and working with the districts on their billing.
Right.
And Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, we're not changing the source of those appropriations within the Department of Health. 50% was going to be federal, or partially federal and partial school foundation program. Is that still in the amendment, school foundation program funding? All right, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Right. I found the amendment. I went back and found it. So I've got that now too. So and just skimming through it, I understand what you did. So appreciate it, Jesse. Any
Okay.
other questions for Jesse? So-
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
yes. So Jesse, the fiscal note on this bill shows initially not a whole lot of savings, and the idea is that we're caught in this conundrum with the supplement but not supplant. But I thought there were some discussions the Department of Health and the Department of Education had several years ago with a consulting group out of Boston. And they had indicated that since we're the only state in the union that doesn't bill for Medicaid, they suggested that it was highly likely that we could go in and get a Medicaid, an amendment to our plan in some way that would permit us to bill more than just the increment of special education costs. Are you familiar with that? And does the department intend to pursue that so that in the long run, if you're successful, this fiscal note is going to be substantially more than the impact would be substantially more that's what's showing in that fiscal note?
Chairman Perkins, Senator Kinski, I think there's a few ways that the fiscal impact could be higher. We do think that the proposal as written will be approvable by the federal government, and that'll allow us to have districts bill us for school-based services, and not just the increment, but the full allowable cost of those services. That'll just be fitting the norm that's happening nationally. The bill currently was written, it's gone through a few iterations, but it sets a a floor of this district size of 25 students, but it also makes the program voluntary. And I believe the floor was added when the bill was going to be mandatory. But we would suggest that you make the whole thing voluntary and not have a floor, because it is voluntary. And so that way, if a district has a very expensive student, we could go work with that district, even if it's a very small district, on that one student that might cost $300,000. And we would just work on that student's billing. And you may not have to capture all the students. So, there's a lot of kids that are in special education, but what we're understanding is that a smaller portion of those use a large dollar value of the services. And so we would suggest we focus on the highest dollar value students first.
Yep.
And we've had some discussions with the special education vendor used by a majority of the districts. And it seems promising. There's nothing that we can guarantee, but it seems promising that they could actually do Medicaid billing from the data that the districts are already entering in that special education software. And that vendor that is used by a majority of school districts is already doing billing in South Dakota to Medicaid. So it did seem promising. We had a demo for education and for the Department of Health that we just explored this a little bit just so we would be more prepared if the bill passed. And it seemed very promising that it could take some of the burden off the districts.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kinski?
Jesse, is section 2 of this bill written in such a way that you'll have the latitude to go in and ask for more than just the increment of increase in special ed, but to cover all of special ed? Section 2 talks about you guys negotiating plan amendments. Is that broad enough for you to do what you were talking about doing?
Chairman Perkins, Senator Kinski, that's the standard language that's used to authorize Medicaid to go pursue a waiver or a state plan amendment. So that should work fine.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kinski?
Having gone through this cycle on this bill and seen it go down before with the argument that the savings are too meager to just, the juice is not worth the squeeze. How do we go about getting a fiscal note that says, oh, by the way, if we can get the plan amended appropriately and the department believes there may be a good chance of doing that, the savings are not a couple $100,000, but tens and tens of millions of dollars?
Well, what I can do for you, first of all, let's go ask Jesse. Jesse, have you guys done any estimates? Do you guys have any idea, or have you guys, in looking at this, have you guys come up with any estimates of what you think you might, a range of savings that you might be able to realize, or, well, not savings, but basically the attaining federal funds to reimburse for the Medicaid required services?
Chairman Perkins, the original bill had a fiscal note on it that noted sizable savings when it was a mandatory program. I believe in the long run over $10 million of savings. And the original study that was the basis that we're all working off this, that was done to kind of correspond with this bill, that Department of Education, Department of Health worked on, did project out large dollar savings. The reason they're not noted in the fiscal note is that all those were based on a mandatory model. And what we don't know is how many school districts will participate in this as a voluntary model. But what we would like to do is work with the voluntary, early starters and prove this model out. And also to just prove that it won't be a huge burden to these school districts. So we think with one position in the Department of Health and, good participation from a couple large school districts, we can bring in much more than the administration costs this program. But if nobody volunteers, then we'll be coming back to you and say nobody volunteered. we've set up the program, we passed the state amendment, and there's no school districts that were willing to participate.
Okay, thank you. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that would just be my question, being fairly new to this committee. Why is it voluntary rather than mandatory? And I realize we all value local control, but if this is something that could save so much money, why did we change that? Thank you.
Chairman Perkins, just the history of this is that, there was a lot of discussion between the legislature and the school districts about how difficult this would be to implement. I think if you did a voluntary program to begin with, we could prove out the model with a smaller group of school districts. I do think a one-year timeline to implement with all school districts would be quite. So, voluntary model and having a year or two to test out the voluntary model. And then, if you're not getting enough volunteers, you could revisit it. If we are getting lots of volunteers, then you may not need to revisit it. So it's just, it would be very hard to implement with all school districts in 1 year as envisioned in the bill. I don't think it would be possible, but I do think we could implement with a few school districts or target the most expensive students in a year.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kinski.
Senator Steinmetz, it was the districts hollering that they much prefer the current system where they get reimbursed 100% and they don't have to be bothered with things like billing statements and that sort of thing. And it was also a fiscal note that showed that we're barely going to generate any savings relative to the costs of startup. So it died through a combination of things. The discussion about potentially amending our plan for a much larger savings got lost in the debate. And the last bill actually made it voluntary, and Laramie County School District had volunteered. It's a huge school district and they had volunteered to pilot it. I don't know if they still feel that way. I think they've changed superintendents since that time, but notwithstanding that, it just died. And I'm hoping if we can show a potential for a greater savings and on a voluntary basis that we might get it done this time. And we don't lose a whole lot with a voluntary basis because they can't handle more than 1 or 2 or 3 districts in a pilot program anyway. And as an additional FYI for you, Sherry, and the rest of the committee, I had correspondence last year with a group that originally had dealt with the Department of Health and Department of Education going back to 2016. And they agreed that the bill that the governor vetoed, which would have made it mandatory, they said it just wouldn't have worked. Wyoming was just too far from a state of readiness. We'd just been on this send your bill in and we'll send you a check program for too long. They said there was just too much groundwork to do. So I think that Mr. Springer is correct in that regard. It's going to take a long time to get them retrained. And we don't have a long time.
I think that I'm relieved to see, or relieved to hear your comments, Jesse, that because the consultants, Alvarez and Marcel, thought that the information that was already being reported in order to receive the reimbursement, that essentially all the information that was going to be required to be reported was already being reported in order to obtain the reimbursement. And so, that was always what the consultants thought. It would, if there was additional information needed, it wouldn't be much. And so we'll find that out. I guess we'll figure that out when we move this forward, Jesse. Assuming it passes, we'll figure that out and know if how big of a burden it is, because they're already reporting most of the costs back to the state for reimbursement anyway. Any other, Senator Drew?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jesse, when you talk about that dropping the 25 or more and go after the more expensive kids, I mean, I think that has a lot of merit to it. So would you just, do we just drop the 25 or more on page 2, line 2021, or do we have different language to talk? Do we have to have different language to talk about going after those other kids. And then maybe Senator Hicks has an amendment that will do just that.
Mr. Chairman, that was one of my amendments.
Okay, good.
There you
All right.
go. All right.
All right. So anything else for Jesse? And thank you, Jesse. Appreciate your time. And thanks for, anyway, thank you. Is there, Lynn Simonson was here and now she left. Is she in the room, Karen? Did she come back or is she just gone?
Mr. Chairman, it appears that she is gone.
Okay. That sounded ominous, but anyway,
My apologies. I am really trying to get up, understand this tech.
So, and Lynn was on the Efficiency Commission, and served on the Efficiency Commission as one of the governor's appointees. And so I'm assuming she was going to say some of the things that we said. And if it's helpful, Dave, I do have, and I can send you the pages from the study that dealt with the estimated cost savings or the estimated savings. And that's why you don't, that's when you look at the fiscal note, it doesn't show any savings, it only shows expenses. So
Yeah, I'd appreciate that so that when we take it out to the floor, it'll be helpful.
I'll send it to you today. Lachelle, how are you?
I'm well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could just spend a moment talking about what the governor's office would like to see from this bill. We did have discussions with the Department of Education and the Department of Health, and the governor's veto last time, one of the concerns was, you're correct, the cost savings from the program and the cost to stand it up in the Department of Health. And I think that we would request that you consider what the Department of Health suggested, removing the 25 cap, but also making it mandatory if we really want to see the cost savings from this. I think that ultimately, ideally, that is the goal. And from my conversations with those two agencies, my understanding is that since this was considered last time, the school districts do have the software that does assist with billing. So it's not the burden that we originally were seeing from their perspective. So to Senator Kinski's point about pushback from the local level, I'm not sure you'll see as much now. But I also don't know, our school districts have been through a lot keeping our schools open this year. How many of them will voluntarily stand a new program up? Hopefully the burden is, not the case and that they can do that. But I'm just concerned if we go towards standing this up in the Department of Health, you may see that there's not a lot of volunteers this year. So I think ultimately we would just like to encourage you to consider making it the most of getting rid of the 25 student cap and then also making it mandatory. So thank you for your time, and I stand for any questions.
Okay, I'm sure we're going to have a couple of questions for you. Sherry, go ahead. Excuse me, Senator Steinmetz, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, that was my question as well, as what incentive is there if it's strictly voluntary, but we're reimbursing at 100% for those expenses now? What if it isn't mandatory? What is the incentive for a school district to go forward with this? I guess I just don't understand that part. Thank you.
And so, do you have a response to that, Lachelle?
Mr. Chairman, no, I think I may agree with Senator Steinmetz. I'm not sure how much incentive there is at this point. I think we were in a different environment when Laramie 1 volunteered to do that. And I do think they will, at that time, they would have wanted additional resources to stand it up. So I think if we're going to do this, I think they now have the ability to take some of that burden off. And I just think if we want to realize the savings that we're talking about, I think it probably needs to be mandatory.
Well, so that's an interesting question, Lachelle. What from Jesse Springer from the Department of Health just testified a minute ago, and his concern was that his suggestion was that we that we leave it voluntary, but remove the 25 cap so that anybody could participate. His thought was that they would then work with school districts to identify those, they'll either, because he said even in the small school districts that are below, that don't have 25 students, there are some very expensive students in theirs. And so they would pick out and they would work with school districts, including some of those that might only have one, but have expensive ones. But one of his concerns was if we did make it mandatory, that they couldn't stand this up in a year, that it's too heavy of a lift to do it in a year if we made it mandatory. So I just wondered if you or the governor's office have any thoughts about that.
We certainly want to support them in the, allocating the resources that they need and support the amendment, obviously, for that position. But beyond that, I'm not sure what additional resources would be necessary to implement this. So through that discussion, I guess I didn't gather that from them that this would be an added, because I do know with the 25 student threshold, my understanding was that you still had almost the majority of districts with that number, so that even if you kept that 25 limit, they would be working with a significant number of districts anyway. So, I don't know what additional resources they would need if we're talking all versus some.
Okay, thank you. Senator or Mr. Vice President?
Yeah, it seems to me the way to do that is to get back to Mr. Springer's comment is to phase it in over 2 years. And so we just put a provision in there that says by July 1st of 2023, which gets them through 2 school years. Starting the third school year, everybody's got to be on board. But, to give them a chance the first year for those that volunteer, the next year they can bring some more on. And by the third year, every school district's got to be on board.
And I guess the other thing you could do, what about if you, I'm seeing you're nodding your head, Lachelle, but what about if we had a school district, if we had a small school district, just didn't have, that the Medicaid reimbursement really was fairly nominal, would we want to provide
Waiver?
an ability for them to obtain some kind of waiver if they can show that it just is not cost effective? Would that make sense? That's a question to you, Lachelle.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think the timeline, the implementation timeline that was suggested makes a lot of sense. And if you want to give those districts flexibility, I certainly think that that's also an option if the cost savings isn't that great. But I guess I'm just suggesting that we just try to get as many people involved in this as possible so that the state does reap the benefits.
Okay. Thank you, Lachelle. Any other questions for Lachelle? Lachelle, thank you for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Jesse, are you still there?
Chairman Perkins still here.
Did you hear our discussion?
Chairman Perkins, I did hear the discussion.
What are your thoughts?
Chairman Perkins, I think that the 1 year voluntary with some sort of mandatory at some point in the future would create an incentive for people to voluntarily participate in the voluntary period and let us work the kinks out before it's mandatory. So whatever that period is, whatever the committee thinks is appropriate. But Lachelle's not incorrect that the savings are much greater under a mandatory model. But to have everyone, and the primary time that's going to take here is to train the school districts how to track the services and to build the services. The Department of Health will be ready to process claims on July 1st, 2022. If this bill is passed, that's not a concern for us. We just know we need time to go out and train districts, sit, one by one with different billing people in the districts and either work with them on how they're tracking and things like that. That's I think the hard work of this, the actual, then we process over 2 million claims a year. We can process a claim. We just need to work with the districts about their billing. And from what we've seen about some of the software that's being used, and there may be other software that's also able to do this, they're pretty close already. But it is going to take some work.
Okay. What did you hear the time frame that Vice President Hicks mentioned? I think he was thinking about you push it out a year. You push out the deadline for a year. So at which time it's I think that's what you said, Senator Hicks. Does that make sense to you, or do you think that's the right time frame? Or?
Chairman Perkins, I think what I heard was implement. So we would submit a state plan amendment and implement internally leading to July 1st, 2022. It would be voluntary until July 1st, 2023, and then it would become mandatory July 1st, 2023. Is that?
Yeah.
I think that if you're chasing the savings, that would make sense. I can't speak to the opposition to the bill, but just from a timeline perspective, that would give us time to roll out. Would give a year of training time for every district. Would allow us to pursue software modifications if districts needed them.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kinski?
Jesse, what software do the school districts have now that they didn't have a couple of years ago? That's question one. Question two, is the procedure going to be that a child gets screened to be Medicaid or not Medicaid? And if Medicaid, then the information goes into the computer? Or is it just going to be that when you're rendering services, you render it in your quarter hour increments? You have to put in an appropriate diagnostic code and a procedure code, and then rely on your computers to pick up who's Medicaid eligible or not? In other words, are they going to be itemizing their services for every child, or just those that they've identified as Medicaid?
Chairman Perkins, Senator Kinski, what I understand is school districts already track time by, and sorry, this is education language. It's a little bit out of my world, but IEP. So they track the time spent by category, by type of employee in the IEP already. Well, that's really all you need to bill. So if you've tracked that a school psychologist spent 30 minutes with a student, all we need to know is, well, is that student Medicaid eligible? So either they could submit everyone, which would be really inefficient, or we could just do a data match to say, match with us to find out who it is. And then what this vendor showed us, and I would assume other vendors it'd be possible for them to do, is then they took that and they said, in the original setup of the IEP, and I'm not sure what that acronym means, they entered which diagnosis codes were appropriate for that student and why they were getting an IEP in the first place.
Okay.
And they established which procedures that student would be using over the course of the year. So every time they billed, they were not having to enter diagnosis codes or procedure codes. That was just stored in the back of the system in the IEP planning process.
Okay.
And so then all that the school districts had to do was track their time. So you track the time by the category of labor and how much time did you spend with the student. And then that converts that to say, well, we have a school district code for school psychologists, 2 15-minute units, and we pay them for that. I don't know if it'll be that simple, but it seemed like the data was being stored. Most of the districts are not using this extra module, and that would be, I think, something that would need to be addressed, is the districts would possibly license this additional module, and that I think that's covered in this pass-through cost model. But obviously this vendor or other vendors, whoever's doing the billing for the school district, would want to be paid. So there's going to be some costs there that the districts will be paying for doing this. Either they're going to pay their software vendor, because what I understand is every district independently picks their special education software. It's
Of
just,
course they do. Of course they do.
it's just a coincidence, I guess, that I think it's like 75 or higher percent use the same software, which
right.
is, which, seemed to be nice software.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks, Jesse. Thank you. Gayle, you're back.
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I was following another committee as well, and I was testifying with it, so sorry.
Okay, well, that's all right. We know we're your favorite committee. So anyway, go ahead. Gayle, would you like to visit with us for a minute? Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Gayle Simmons. I am a civics geek, and I also served on the efficiency committee. And I just want to point out a couple of things. There were, close to $100 million in biennial savings that were identified by the efficiency committee and commission through Alvarez and Marcel. And unfortunately, very few of them have actually been implemented. I believe that a similar bill was passed last year and was perhaps vetoed. I don't know that we are in the same position we were before. I think that we have to move towards making this mandatory. The great benefit is that this is not an obligation of state funds into the future. It is funds we are expending right now that would be replaced by federal funds with the additional, as was pointed out, the administrative funding that is provided as well. So I would hope that there would be some pretty strong language about, yeah, okay, go ahead for the first year and have it be a pilot, if you will, but then have it be set to be mandatory. The reality of the state is, both I think politically and fiscally, is that we're in, well, I'm not telling you anything new. We are so far in the hole on how we're going to do our funding for education. And there's going to be no appetite for any kind of increased revenue to cover those costs until the citizens feel that every single dime that can be saved is in fact saved. And this is one that is particularly easy to both identify and to pass on for people to understand that this is a one-for-one. It's not an additional obligation. So I really want to urge you to pass this, to work with the governor's office to ensure that it occurs, but also to look past just the initial and go into the work towards making it mandatory. And I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Gayle. Questions for Ms. Simmons? Thank you, Gayle. Appreciate your time and effort. Thanks for coming and talking today. Right, committee, is there, Karen, is there any other public comment? That's everybody I see.
Mr. Chairman, I have Trent Carroll from the Department of.
Okay. Trent, welcome.
Good afternoon, Chairman Perkins. Good to see you. Good afternoon, Senators. Sorry, I didn't realize that I had not raised my virtual hand, and so I probably would have been in here a little bit earlier. But a good conversation this afternoon on the bill. I think that Jesse did a great job covering the specifics, and appreciate Lachelle's comments as well. I just wanted to add that the original report that we had put together with the Department of Health, it did assume a mandatory model, and with the 25 threshold or a 100 threshold, we had two different options that we provided in there, with the estimated revenue for both of those. So I just wanted to mention that. I also wanted to mention that Chairman Perkins, you kind of walked through the proposed funding flow. And if you recall, we had to be a little bit creative to try to maximize the revenue that we could claim under the program because of our unique 100% reimbursement model in our state. You know, the question came up, how do we work around some of those federal IDEA requirements, the maintenance of effort at the district level and the maintenance of financial support at the state level. And so we put together that proposal, but that would have to be approved by OSET before we could implement that. And so I just wanted to put a little caveat there that, you know, that's a pretty significant piece of the puzzle that we would still have to work through if this bill passes and the Medicaid plan is amended. So just wanted to mention those two things. I'm happy to answer any questions. Senator Kinski, I did make a note here, your question about the district software that was available 2 years ago versus now. Jesse hit on a couple of things. You know, I would just add that this the SPED Advantage software that we're talking about, it is used by districts to document the, to basically store the IEP documentation, and it's been around a while. We have, I think, 42 out of 48 districts using it. But the difference between then and now is that that vendor has started doing school-based services billing in South Dakota. And so they've created the module for that. They've used it in another state. And from some initial conversations we've had with the vendor, it would be pretty straightforward to bring that online for our Wyoming districts. So hope that helps answer your question a little bit more, and happy to answer anything else the committee might have.
Thank you. Trent, could, if though that last report you referred to, you guys had done some kind of analysis of what you thought the revenues might be with respect to the 25 plan and if it was just mandatory across the board. Could you resend that to us?
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to forward that on to you, and I can give you just, you know, a couple of numbers here really quick. We kind of used a biennium total and then year 3 and beyond estimate. There were some other factors that we considered. You know, how quickly would districts would this be adopted in terms of the parental consent that has to be granted? So we assumed a 40% in year 1, a 60% in year 2, and an 80% in year 3 and beyond. That was the model that we put together with the consultants. But the biennium total for the 25 threshold estimated revenue was just under 5.4 million. And this was under a mandatory model. And then for the 100 threshold, we had just over 3.7 million. Now that's total revenue. Of course, we have administrative costs at both the district level and the state level. The administrative costs between the Department of Health and Department of Education have changed a little bit. You guys talked about the proposed amendment earlier, but the net revenue, so this would be district administrative costs that they're claiming through the typical reimbursement process. The state administrative costs, you know, we'd be looking at about 3.2 million net for the 25 threshold and about 2.7 net for the 100 threshold. Those were the estimates that we had. Now that was based on 18-19 data because we did this report 2 years ago. So that's just a ballpark.
And those costs have decreased a lot over the last couple of years, haven't they? No, I'm kidding. They only go one direction. They're increasing. In fact, when we were looking at the Efficiency Commission, they're increasing at somewhere around year over year, 6 to 8% a year over year. Is that still holding true?
Yeah, we've seen years, Mr. Chairman, we've seen years with higher percentage increases than other years. You know, we typically on average estimate about a 4% increase. Remember that we did have a cap on special education for 2 years. So that changed things a little bit. But you're right, over the last 10 years, they've been increasing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, if you could forward that to us, I think that might help us when we go, as we discuss this bill, if it moves forward. Okay.
Will do. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions for Trent? Carol? Thank you, Trent. Appreciate your attendance today.
Thank you.
Karen, is there anybody else in the room that wants to
Cheryl
testify on this one?
Rowland has raised her hand to testify as well.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Folland, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Cheryl Foland, and I am a licensed clinical social worker in Rollins. I have a private practice, and I do a lot of work with our local school district. And I'm not for or against this particular bill. I do, however, would like to urge the committee to consider some potential unintended consequences that happen when doing billing for Medicaid. I am a Medicaid provider, approved provider, and that there is a considerable amount of time per child that is required. I think that perhaps our agencies underestimate what it actually takes to bill an agency and an entity. And the supporting documentation, while it sits in the background in a computer, it still has to be accessed, downloaded, then uploaded into the state system. Even with the software that is currently out there, this is not a quick fix. It does take time, and the administrative burden can be extensive. For just what I have to do for Medicaid requirements, it takes me approximately 15 to 20 minutes per visit when I'm to bill. And that does add up. In a former life, I was a quality health and safety manager for 2 international companies. So I certainly understand Senator Kinski's desire for efficiency within practices. But I do encourage the committee to consider that the administrative component of this, even with appropriate training, is going to take a significant period of time. And thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Folland. We appreciate your attendance today, and thank you for the work that you do with the students in Carbon County.
Thank you.
Anybody have any questions for Ms. Folland? Mr. Vice President.
I'm just waving to one of my constituents.
It's a virtual parade. Okay, we got
There you
go. Thank you, Ms. Folland. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Karen, is there anybody else in the room?
No, Mr. Chairman, there's not.
All right. Well, with that, we'll conclude and close off our public comment on the bill. Members, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Second.
Got a motion by Senator Hicks and a second by Senator Kinski. We're on the bill. I think we've got Mr. Vice President. Why don't we start with yours?
All right, page 2, line 21.
Right there.
Strike the word 25 and more. So that would be the first part of the amendment. So I think we dispose of that one, Mr. Chairman, if we could get a second.
Second.
Got a second from Senator Guru.
All right, all that does is get rid of the 25, so it'll now read each school district with Medicaid eligible students receiving special education programs and services, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we get rid of that, I've got some language to take care of the phased in school year in the same section, but on the next page, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so that's fine. What do you want? What we just
Question.
break it there and just question on that amendment?
Yep.
Any discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed? Well, it's unanimous. Thank you. That motion carries. Mr. Vice President, continue.
Mr. Chairman, page 3, line, let's see, 20. After department, we would insert for the 21-22 school year.
Now, which line is this, Mr. Vice President?
So if you go to page 3, line 20,
Oh,
20, okay.
after department, insert for the 21-22 school year. So that gives them the 1 year of voluntary effort. So the next part of that would be put a period, and then we would start with new language after the period that says same language, but it'll just stay. So if we go up to, it says a school district may, up on line 17, we'll just bring that whole thing down and then say a school district shall report the number of Medicaid eligible students receiving special education program services enrolled within the school district on forms of such a matter required by the department for the 22-23 school year.
Okay.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. We got a second from Senator Kinski. Do we need to, is it the 22-23 school year and thereafter, or?
Yeah, thereafter.
We don't want to have it go away in 24, I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's a technical correction to the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Karen, have you got that? You understand that?
I have the amendment.
Okay, you have it. All right. Is there any other questions or modifications about that, or ready for the question? All those in favor, raise your hand. All right, that's unanimous. That motion carries. Senator Rue? Oh, you're still voting. Okay, Mr. Vice President, did you have anything else?
No, I did not. The proposed amendment that the Department of Education brought addressed my concerns on the other potential amendment.
Okay, and we'll get this, I think Senator Kinski has that. If he doesn't, I do. Let me ask you one question while we're there. If you go on, staying on page 3, if you go back up at line 4, starting at the end of line 4, you have this language: no other school district shall bill the Department of Health under this subsection. Do we need to strike the language now with the, okay.
Second.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I actually had that, and I not following my script, but yeah, we need to, starting with by, or where was that language? Line 3?
Yes, it starts at the end of line 4. And so you strike on line 4, you strike no other, and you would strike all of line 5 and then through this subsection on line 6.
Correct. Second.
Karen, have you got that?
Yes, sir.
You have the
Going forward,
amendment.
starting with no other.
You have, yeah, you have the amendment because he gave it to you. He just wasn't following it, right?
I do have the amendment, yes.
Okay. The higher you get in leadership, Mr. Vice President, the more important it is to follow the script.
Yeah.
So
Well,
okay.
that's all kinds of good news.
Okay, so we voted on that?
No.
No, we didn't.
Okay. All those in favor, say, raise your hand. That motion carries.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Senator Kinski.
I would move the amendment that we have in the email of February 19th from Franz Fuchs that was discussed during the testimony from the public. And I believe Karen has that. It involves striking section 3A. Let me get there in its entirety.
Mhm.
Well, he didn't give us a page number.
Page 5, line 17.
Okay. Well, the rest of the amendment is set forth in that letter. I'd move that amendment.
Yeah, yeah, okay, we've got a motion second, and yeah, I mean, it's moving the appropriation around, change a little bit and increase the, it's still 50-50 match on the federal offset. So Any further discussion or questions on that motion? It's been moved and seconded. Let's see, you moved that, who, as Senator Steinmetz, she seconded that? Oh, Senator Drew seconded that. All right. Any other question? Are we ready for the question? All those in favor, raise your hand. All right, that motion has carried. Are there other amendments? Other discussion? Are we ready for the question on the bill?
Question.
Let's go ahead and call the roll on the bill as amended, Karen.
Pardon me. On Senate File 79 as amended, Senator Guru,
Aye.
Senator Hicks,
Aye.
Senator Kinski,
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz,
Aye.
Chairman Perkins,
Aye.
5 ayes.
Okay. Does anybody want this one? I'm happy to take it because I've been working on this thing for 4 years.
Well, let's make it a House file.
Yeah, Karen, can you pull together a JAC and we'll bring it up again in JAC. There we go.
In another meeting, yeah.
We rehash our bills and talk about it again, so.
All right, I'll put Drew to carry.
Okay.
That's
All right.
different. That's different than Drew carry. That's Drew to carry.
Carry. All right.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to jump off and go to Revenue Committee for a minute,
You want us to hold these open for you, these other bills open for you to get?
if you would, please.
Okay, don't forget to check you back in with Karen.
I'll do it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vice President. So let's jump back. We'll go back and pick up 71 now. Senate File 71, Strategic Investments and Projects Account Repeal. I think we worked on this one before, and what it does, it gets away of the strategic account and folds all those and just dumps them into the general fund. Does anybody have any questions or about this?
We've worked it over pretty thoroughly.
Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward what it does and how we get there. So, Karen, is there anybody that wanted to testify on 71?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
We do have a letter from the governor in support.
It looked like Erica from the governor's office is here. Hello, Erica. How are you?
Good, Chairman. How are you?
Fine. Long time no see. It's been, less than 24 hours.
Right, it has been. I was going to say it was, and it sounded like you guys had a longer night than I did, so that's not good.
So yes, what would you like to tell us this morning?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make this quick. So I'm Erica Legursky, Policy Advisor for Governor Gordon. And as Senator Kinski mentioned, we did write a letter of support for Senate File 71. We've had a couple conversations with Senator Hicks regarding this bill. And as you're aware, the governor just wanted to, extend his appreciation to the committee for taking this important step towards improving transparency in Wyoming's budgeting process. As you know, this is one of the governor's goals, and one of his initiatives this year is to improve and simplify the budgeting process. So we just wanted to let you know that we're very appreciative and supportive of this bill. Also wanted to let you know that we did send a copy of the letter that we had sent to you also over to House Appropriations, just to let them know that that we were in support of this bill on your side, so that they would have the same letter.
All right. Thank you, Erica. Appreciate it. Thank you. Any questions? Anybody have any questions for Ms. Legursky? Thank you, Erica.
Thanks. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Karen, is there anybody else that wanted to visit about this bill? Karen, if you answered us, you were on mute still.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. I do not have any other attendees with their hands raised, so I believe we're okay now.
Okay, thank you. Is there Your pleasure, committee.
Move the bill.
Move the bill.
Moved by Senator Guru and seconded by Senator Steinmetz. Any questions or amendments? You ready for the question on the bill? Go ahead and let's take the roll on this, and we'll hold it open for Vice President Hicks.
On Senate File 71, Senator Guru,
Aye.
Senator Kinski,
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz,
Aye.
Chairman Perkins.
Aye.
Currently, you have 4 ayes, and we're leaving it open for Senator Hicks.
All right, thank you. The next bill for our consideration this morning is Senate File 72, Financial Accounts Reporting and Budget Reductions. This was the that all it really did was repeal the Financial Council, which my understanding, if I remember right, this hasn't been used in several years. So it was you know, and then the other thing it did, it changed those dates back to kind of conform with what practice has been later with respect to when they provide instead of the preliminary report, they provide the annual financial report, which is by December 15th, or excuse me, by December 31st of each year. And that's supposed to be the CAFRA, if I remember right. So that's, and then the repealer it repealed the provisions, if I remember right, on the Financial Council that hasn't met in half a decade or more. So do I remember that right, y'all? All right.
I think so.
So is there, Madam Auditor.
Somebody here to straighten us out. Busted.
Boom. Did we get it right, Madam Auditor?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is correct. It essentially does 3 things. Repeals the Financial Advisory Council, which you are correct in that has only existed for 10 years, and they've met maybe 3 or 4 times in the first 5 years of that 10. The second thing it does is it eliminates a preliminary CAFR, which we've told you before was sort of useless because it's so preliminary. It's just entirely inaccurate and drags on staff resources, which are precious these days. And then it changes our final CAFR deadline from December 15th to December 31st, which just works 100,000 times better for us if it doesn't inconvenience anyone else, which we don't think it does. And that's all, Mr. Chairman.
Only 100,000 times, Madam Auditor?
Only. It's really helpful. This is not, Mr. Chairman, this may not be the most exciting bill you deal with, but we're real excited about it.
If we can make you smile, Madam Auditor, we're happy to do that.
Great.
Anybody have any questions for Auditor Racinas? Go ahead, Sherry, go ahead. Excuse me, Senator Steinmetz.
I just wondered if that meant you owe us one.
Forever in your service, Mr. Chairman and Senator Steinmetz, of course.
There you go.
So how are we doing with our reporting this year? Are we making progress?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we are. I've talked to you a little bit about some of the delays that have happened this year. Not entirely completely out of our control, but mostly out of our control. And we do expect a final CAFR to be issued in the next week. So
okay.
We should be good. Thank you.
Good. So hopefully next year this year's behind us and we'll be on. Yeah, hopefully. We'll keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, a note on that. We've spent a lot of CARES money in fiscal year 21 already. So that will be a ball of wax for sure. And if we get additional federal funds, of course, that'll bleed over into fiscal year 22, but we'll get it done.
I'm sure you will. We have every confidence in you and your office.
Thank you.
Thank you. Karen, is there anybody else that wish to address the committee on Senate File 72?
And I don't have anyone raising their hand in the waiting room.
All right. Committee will close off public comment. What's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Moved by Senator Steinmetz and seconded by Senator Kinski. Are there any amendments or discussion with respect to the bill? You ready for the question? let's go ahead and call the roll and on the bill, leaving it open for Vice President Hicks.
Senate File 72, Senator Grew,
Aye.
Senator Kinski,
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz,
Aye.
Chairman Perkins.
Aye.
Currently 4 ayes.
All right, next, the final bill for our consideration this afternoon is Senate File 82, local impact assistance. What this did, it went into the distribution formula on the Industrial Siting Commission, and as it wills through and it distributes those fees, it changes that to require an enhanced fact finding before they, as I understand the bill, it requires some enhanced fact finding by the Industrial Siting Commission, so that to justify the basis for the total dollar determination, it reduced the minimum, the maximum impact assistance payments from 2.76% to 2%, and then also gave them some direction and regarding determining the distribution rate or a distribution ratio. This is on the top of page 4, that they have the ability to consider to the extent and location of unmitigated impacts, the populations affected counties, cities and towns, and other equitable any other equitable factor, so that it enhances their flexibility and ability to do that, although it's reduce the maximum amount that they can do that. Then there's some definitions for what unmitigated impacts are, what it includes and what it excludes. And then I think it just, after that, it's just some conforming language so that it's consistent in the distribution for 39-16-11. That makes it the same as it was in 39-15-111. So that's what I remember about the bill. And is there any other questions or discussion on the bill? We'll go ahead and why don't we open this up to, I think we've got Luke. Luke, welcome. Glad to have you.
Mr. Chairman, good to be here. Members of the committee, thank you. My name is Luke Esch. I'm with the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality. I'm the Deputy Director. We have no position on this bill today. Also, Director Parfit sends his regrets for being unable to be here. We also have Colin McKee, the Acting Administrator of the Industrial Siting Division, here for questions. But with that, yeah, we're just here to answer any questions for the committee.
I think the only question that we have is, how do you see this bill changing the function and what the Industrial Siting Commission does, Colin?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't see it affecting the function of what the council does. Obviously, it would lessen the amount of potential impact assistance payments that they could award. I would say historically, the council has not, on average, they have not awarded the maximum amount of impact assistance. They've, I think, tried their best to determine what they thought were unmitigated impacts from projects. So that's one part. And then the other component is providing a definition of what an unmitigated impact is. I'd say the council hasn't started yet, but they will be going through a rulemaking process with the intent of further defining what unmitigated impacts are. And so I think providing some direction in statute will be helpful for them. I would assume it would be the local governments that may have more to say on the actual definition of unmitigated and whether that's encompassing enough.
Okay. Just out of that, and I misspoke, it doesn't change your function, but on the distribution that you have, I mean, what I really meant to ask was, how do you see that changing what you're doing with respect to distributions now? I mean, obviously there's the lower ceiling amount, and the ceiling's been lowered a little bit, but I just, I mean, like you said, you haven't, yeah, you haven't, your general practice is most of the time you're not you weren't doing the maximum amount you could distribute anyway. So I just wonder, as a practical matter, if how that affects your discussion as you allocate and determine your allocations for the distribution. To me, it doesn't. I don't like say you have definition of impacts might give you a little bit more. You might look at a little bit more specificity and findings, but other than that, it seems to me you're still doing what you've always done. Am I missing something?
Mr. Chairman, no, you're not. So the additional language on page 4 essentially says that the council can consider an area that they think has unmitigated impacts and focus in on that. Through our current process, when an application is submitted, we identify what's called the area primarily affected. And so in the application that a developer submits, we get to see the anticipated impacts to communities and then kind of include them and who would be eligible for impact assistance. So I think the council largely does that. Again, I think the language that's provided gives some additional direction. And then the other part that would have most relevance, again, would be on page 6 and the definition of unmitigated, where it says that the expenses shall be supported by an analysis prepared by a county, city, or town. That is one thing that the local governments currently do as well. So when they request a certain amount of impact assistance, that is backed up by some type of analysis. I will say the depth of the analysis varies, and that's simply dependent upon the capacity of a local government to put together something like that. But so yeah, again, I think you're providing more structure to their process, but it's not going to make it change significantly.
It just also, I guess the other question I'd have for you is, as we look at this reduction of on the ceiling of 7.65%, what was represented to us as we discussed this bill is exactly what you said, that the council wasn't giving the maximum amount anyway. So at 2%, is that roughly where you were and what you were actually distributing before, or is it help me understand the effect that change reduction in the ceiling does?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to throw out a few percentages at you, and so hopefully you can follow. But so right now, the cap is set at 2.76% of the material cost of a project. So 2.76%. On average, the council has awarded 65% of that amount. So it would effectively be a 1.8% award. And the cap that you're proposing to put in statute would be 2%. So there's the council is on average giving out 1.8%. You're putting a cap of 2%. And again, I'd say they've gone above and below. It's a 65% average, but on average, they are staying within the amount that you're proposing to change it to.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Any other questions for either Luke or Colin?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kinski.
I'm going through my file. I'm missing some of the exhibits, and maybe Karen has it, or Luke or Colin could send those to me. There were exhibits showing the history of the grants, and what I recall, at least as they were characterized in the course of the debate, is in the recent past, there wasn't very many requests from local government that were turned down. And then we had hearings on some of these bills, and I think we urged you and your group to take a keener look at some of those. And so some were turned down, and but there's still a huge amount of money, I think, going out. And then there was a projection as to the amount of money that upcoming projects potentially would yield. And I think it was in excess of $20 million being diverted from the general fund to local governments. I can't find that exhibit. This pandemic working from home's got me at a loss for keeping track of this paper, but I surely would like a copy of that, because when Chairman Perkins and Senator Guru present this on the Senate floor, I want them to have all of the necessary exhibits to make a compelling case. Thank you. If one or the other of you could send that, I'd appreciate it to the committee.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Senator Kensky, we had sent 2 brief reports to JAC in mid-December. And yeah, we'd be happy to send that to the committee again.
And so if were those committee handouts, did you send them to LSO and then they were distributed through LSO through the budget and fiscal folks? Do you remember, Colin?
Mr. Chairman, I believe Representative Nicholas contacted us directly, and I did not send the reports. Director Parfit's assistant submitted the reports back to LSO. I do believe she included Don Richards, but again,
we might find those on SharePoint. That's just what I'm wondering. We probably have those. My guess is they're exhibits we can find on SharePoint, but if you've got them handy, you can get them to Senator and forward an email to Senator Kinski. That'd be awesome too.
Well, or to the whole committee, because you're the guys that got to carry it on the floor.
You're in the last bill. This is yours.
Okay. What goes around comes around, Kinski. Anyway.
Well, you don't have to live with Senator Hicks. I do.
Okay. Thanks, Colin.
Mr. Chairman, we can provide those copies of those documents to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Luke. Any other questions for either Luke or Colin? Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your time today and the information. Mr. Boner, do you wish to address the committee on this bill? Senator Boner? Good morning, good afternoon.
Oh, hey, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, sure. Just thought I'd stop in briefly. I appreciate the committee's work on this. It looks like you're on a roll, so I won't slow you down too much, but this is something that significantly affected, I guess, Commerce and Natrona counties when we went through this process for the Cedar Springs wind project. I appreciate the committee's work, especially with the definitions. I think that's looking through the bill, that's going to provide a lot of clarity, because what I observed firsthand sitting through those industrial sign council meetings is that there's lots of different types of justifications for these impact payments coming from our municipalities and counties, and they varied significantly to the point where I think it undermined the credibility of the process. And at the end of the day, if I remember correctly, they just, Industrial Sign Council just came in and cut everybody by about 20%. So a more nuanced approach that defines and clearly shows what our expectations are for an unmitigated impact would be greatly helpful. And I think if nothing else, a part of the bill is really important, and will take care of a lot of the other issues with the even messing or changing the cap. Maybe just point out the definitions is really important. Stand in support of the bill. Appreciate the committee's work, and just want to make myself available for any questions as both a legislator from an area affected by it, but also a citizen who was a part of the process too.
Thank you, Senator Boner. Appreciate your time and your insights today. Anybody have any questions for Senator Boner?
I do, Mr. Chairman. When is the new baby due?
May 3rd. So we'll see what happens.
Okay.
Yeah. more important question there. So
every other year you have an emergency that pulls you out of the session. Okay.
This year it's going to be calving season. I got
Okay, thank you. Any other relevant questions for Senator Boner? Thank you, Senator Boner. Appreciate you. Karen, is there anybody else?
I have one other person that I'm bringing into the room, John Johnson.
Thank you. John, Mr. Johnson, welcome.
Hey.
Hello, Mr. Johnson. Welcome. Go ahead. We're ready to hear from you if you're ready to talk to us. We're happy to have you.
I'm sorry, you've got me labeled as John Johnson. I'm actually Brian Lovett, Laramie County Commander.
Well, Okay, Mr. Levitt, alias John Johnson, go ahead. We're glad to have you.
Speaking on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association, we speak in opposition to the bill. We do have several things we disagree with. I won't go into detail on the distribution amount. You've done a pretty good job of summarizing that already. We feel that the Industrial Siting Council has held that back to about the level or a little bit below what is being proposed in the bill. Our concern is that by eliminating that 2.76%, we reduce that flexibility. There certainly is going to be projects in areas that don't have the level of infrastructure. And that was the reason this bill was put together in the first place. If you remember, this all started in Gillette during the coal mine days, when communities were simply overwhelmed by industrial development. And we see that as still being a possibility, so would like that flexibility. We would like to see the inclusion of any other equitable factor is included on page 4. We don't feel that belongs. This program is put in place to affect direct and indirect impacts and not to provide any type of equity. And so felt that needed to be removed. The effective date, it talks about approved on or after the effective date of this act. We would like to see that change to when the application comes in. There is a lag time between application processing and the actual formal decision of the council, and feel something could kind of get caught in the middle there. And so those are things that we disagree with. Having said that, I want to point out several things that we do think have value and we would support. Requiring the Industrial Siting Council to provide finding of facts detailing its decisions. We feel that's very valuable to the process, helps local government and communities determine what it is they are really looking for and how they're going to make those decisions. We would suggest that justification for each partial or whole impact assistance application element that was rejected be included in that findings of fact. Again, to help them figure out what it is that qualifies, how to make it fit in the box. The other thing we would like to see is establishing a definition of unmitigated impacts. The director talked about that is in process already. I know it was suggested by this group a year ago when we were discussing this same type of bill, and progress has made in that direction. And I think there's support from all involved to get a much more defined definition of what an unmitigated impact is. So we would support that. Under page 5, line 20, we would request directly be deleted or conversely or indirectly be inserted. Again, going back to impact assistance is for both direct and indirect impacts from these projects. Establishing reporting requirements to ensure expenditures occurred. I know there's been a great deal of concern that this is
Mr. Chairman.
Simply.
Hang on there, Mr. Levitt. Senator Kinski, you have a question?
Mr. Levitt, if you've got those written out, it'd be helpful if those could be sent to us. I'm trying to track through, and I'm having about 50% success, but I just would ask when you're done with your testimony, if you could actually email those, that'd be very helpful.
I will have our executive assistant do that. Thank you.
Continue on, Mr. Johnson, also known as Mr. Levitt.
I believe that covers it, and I will stand for questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Levitt. Go ahead, Senator Kinski.
So I thought what Mr. Levitt said was that he would like this to not be effective for apps that are already in the pipeline. I might have misunderstood, but I'm looking on page 11, section 2, and it seems to address what I thought you had said, and maybe I misunderstood what your statement was. Section 2 says this will only apply on a prospective basis, not to things already in the pipeline. Does that address?
Yep. referring to page 11, that language regarding when it would go into effect is on page 11.
Right, it's page 11, line 4, if you have the printout of the bills where it starts.
Yeah, and so currently it says approved on or after the effective date of this act. And so those would be projects that were approved. What we're asking for is that it would go back to the application process for a project. Those are fairly lengthy review process. And then also there's a lag between the hearing and the decision making of the council. So you could have local government working off of a number or a process that may actually not be the one that applies when the decision is made.
So there's the way to fix that. So we've got changed approved on to submitted on or before, applications submitted on or after the effective date. Would that solve the issue?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if you keep reading, impact assistance payments for industrial facilities are not subject to this act shall be determined on the basis of the law as it existed at the time of the request for the impact assistance payment was submitted. So doesn't that take care of the concern?
I don't think it does, because the request for impact assistance comes subsequent to the application to the ISC. I think that's the problem, Now it says Mr. Levitt. So anyway, on Air Force. So I think that's what you're telling us. Is that right, Mr. Levitt?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So you could either change it to applications submitted, or you could fix it in line 5, where you might be able to, at the time the application to the industrial siting committee, which, so you could fix it either, I think one of a couple ways there, but I think you could address that a couple ways. That makes sense. But thank you for doing that, Senator Kinski. I kind of got lost. Mr. Levitt was going pretty fast, so I kind of got lost on that one. So I appreciate that. Okay, any other questions for Mr. Levitt? Well, thank you, Mr. Levitt. And thanks for your time today. Appreciate it, and your insight and your suggestions.
Mr. Chairman, I have questions for Luke and Colin with respect to the comment about or any other equitable factor. My inclination is to take that out as well. It appears in at least 2 places, but I'd like to hear from them whether there's some reason to keep that in.
Mr. Chairman, Luke Esch with the Department of Environmental Quality. During the course of these hearings, there's a lot of evidence that's submitted regarding impacts to communities that don't necessarily fall within a certain box. I think the additional language would allow the council to consider certain things that are submitted that aren't directly included in one of the statutory conditions. But we certainly would defer to the discretion of this committee.
Okay, thank you. Luke, Senator Kinski, anything else for Luke?
No, that's helpful, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Luke. So if now we have the real Mr. Johnson. So we're happy to have you. You don't look anything like Mr. Levitt. So anyway, we're glad to have you, Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. You got the better looking of the two. Mr. Chairman, members of committee, I am John Johnson. I'm Chairman of the Board of Carbon County Commissioners of Carbon County. I'm here to speak on behalf of the Senate File 82. And I agree with the position that the CCA stands in opposition to this. And Mr. Levitt went through the changes that the state association really is looking for, but I'd like to address the 2.76 versus a 2% threshold. I've been on I've testified in front of the industrial siting for every one of the projects that have come through the industrial siting as far as the new rules. And when we go through and work these through, we're sometimes really close to the threshold, and then we have to work back down. But we do take a bottom-up approach to it. But in regards to a project on Gateway West out towards the town of Medicine Bow on the Aola substation, the Carbon County ended up with a nearly $1.3 million snowplow removal bill out there. And we hadn't, and that project reached the cap. And so if it was left high enough, we could have went, if you leave it high enough in that scenario, and given that the council does do a pretty good job now of coming under that maximum threshold, the affected entities have the ability to come back and apply for some additional funding. And I think that would be extremely beneficial to everybody. It would have been beneficial to Carbon County on that one, but we were at the max, we couldn't do that. The system that's right now, I think is working very, very well. I sat in on the last one when I was first a commissioner on the Power Company of Wyoming, Chokecherry Sierra Madre on the old rules. And the difference between the old rules and the new rules was just when we did the first permitting thing and when we heard Boswell Springs, the learning curve was extremely high. So I'd hate to see a complete rewrite of the bill, which obviously it's not. So I like that. And I can't stress enough when we go through the local process and figuring out the impacts, having the ability to look at and tell everybody involved that their project might not fit the definition of unmitigated impacts is be extremely beneficial for us and clear up a lot of heartburn. And I have no doubt that the request would come in significantly lower. And I guess with that, I would stand for questions. This is the first time I had to testify, by the way.
You're a pro. So anyway,
yeah.
Anyway, and thanks for dressing up. We appreciate it.
I have my cattle working stuff underneath the chair.
Yeah, we don't want to see the bottom half. But anyway, you never know what anybody. Yes, Zoom is always interesting. So but thank you for testifying, Dave. Appreciate your insight and your experience, and you know it takes it's helpful to have on people who've been through the process and have seen it through and can help provide some practical input to how these things affect folks in the area. So appreciate that. Anybody else have any other questions for Mr. Johnson? Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Could I add, Mr. Chairman, could I add one more thing?
Sure, go ahead.
Without a process like this, the local governments, the Carbon County specifically, when I'm speaking about, we would have no mechanism to provide basic statutory duties like health and safety. So we'd really have to do a lot of consideration when these projects come before us to get a conditional use permit. So this is a very, very valuable tool to the local governments. And with that, I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Schilling, would you like to visit with the committee this afternoon?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Appreciate it. My name is Justin Schilling. I'm with the Wyoming Association of Municipalities. Director Frazier sends his regards. We were split about 3 ways at once today, so I got to pinch hit. So on behalf of the association, we'd like to echo a lot of the concerns from our counterparts on the county level, mainly on the percentage. It's a pretty steep drop. It doesn't sound like a lot, 2.76 down to 2, but the 38% of the capacity of these funds that would be lost with that change is pretty significant to our municipalities, especially. And given some of the projects that are on the horizon for the state, especially here in the southeast corner, where some of our smallest communities are fairly cash strapped to begin with, may see some fairly heavy burdens put on them. You know, the ability to have that capacity or have that extra ceiling, we think is important, as the commissioner stated as well. We think the council does a good job of policing these amounts, and obviously, as they stated, they generally keep the percentages awarded below. But I think, and as the county commissioners echoed, to have that extra capacity for extreme circumstances or unique circumstances, we think is important as the state moves forward, to make sure that we don't have some very small communities that, you know, especially as we start to look at developing rare earth minerals and obviously the nuclear field update here in the southeast corner, some of these other big projects, to not have small communities that just get so thoroughly overwhelmed and we don't have a mechanism to be able to take care of them and the safety and services to those folks that come in to work those projects. So that's basically all we have from the municipal side of things. We agree with with some of the bill language changes that the county commission brought forward, and support their position on those as well. With that, I would stand for any other questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Justin. Appreciate your time today. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Schilling? Thank you, Mr. Schilling. Appreciate it. Looks like we have Chris Boswell, who's just entered the room. Mr. Boswell, welcome.
Maybe now I'm unmuted, Mr. Chairman.
We can hear you, Chris.
It's a magical process, this Zoom. It only took me 45 minutes to get in today. So thank you. I'm glad this worked, Mr. Chairman. My name is Chris Boswell. I'm the chairman of the Industrial Siting Council. And I am here primarily to answer questions if you have them. I've been able to observe several of the Appropriations Committee's hearings on this subject over the years, and I've noted that there's been a concern of the industrial siting process and the decisions the council has made. I'm neither in favor nor against this bill. We'll follow the law as it exists, but I think it's worth noting. I'll make 4 points if I can very quickly, Mr. Chairman. In the past, there's been some suggestion that these funds are in some fashion being paid by the project proponents into a state account, and then those funds are then being paid out in impact assistance payments to local governments. That's not really it. The way this works is that the project proponents estimate the materials costs for a project. The Industrial Siting Council does the math with a 2.76%. And local governments typically in the past few years have requested very nearly the maximum. From my recollection, the last time that there were local governments asking for significantly less than the maximum on a project was out in Uintah County. It was my first meeting on the council in October of 2018. And I asked the local governments, why aren't you asking for more money? And I got one of the most remarkable answers that I've gotten in 30 or 40 years of public life, which is, we're conservative. And second, we've dealt with booms and we know how to deal with them in Uintah County. And they asked for far, far less than the maximum. So I guess my point at the end, in order to get back to the notion of where this money comes from, this is a draw out of the general fund. That's a straight description of what's happening here. And that's why there's been some concern on the part of some folks about the amount of money that's gone out because again, it's a straight draw on the general fund. It's based on the expectation that sales tax will be received by the state at some level based on that materials cost estimate. But I think it's also important for the committee to remember that materials cost estimate is made by the project proponent. It's frequently made sometimes years before the project actually begins. And there's nothing to say that a project doesn't come in, believe it or not, at less money, lower materials costs. And then you wind up with general funds going out based on the expectation of sales tax of materials costs that actually aren't materialized. A prime example of that in recent memory would be the Roundhouse project in Laramie County, where there were originally going to be about 100 turbines. I don't have these numbers quite right. And the project proponents cut the project off basically about 2/3 of the way through. They built roughly 2/3 of those wind turbines and then stopped the project, primarily because they stopped the continuation of the project. And so the actual financial receipt in terms of sales tax receipts to the general fund was significantly lower than one might have expected. But the impact assistance payments went out based on the higher level. Again, that's because we're making our decisions sometimes months, many months before a project actually begins. My second point is that occasionally in these committees, the Industrial Siting Council, our decisions have been questioned in terms of how much money is going out and why is so much going out. And those questions are very appropriate, Mr. Chairman. And just in the last 3 years, including the current fiscal year, $51 million went out to 6 counties in impact assistance payments. $51 million to 6 counties. Those 6 counties are Albany, Carbon, Converse, Laramie, Natrona, and Sweetwater. Why did all that money go out to those local governments? Because these are big doggone projects, and they do have very big impacts, both in terms of sales tax receipts, but also in terms of the economies of the local counties. But the folks are right to be somewhat stunned by the amount of money that goes out from the general fund to these counties without an appropriation from the legislature. And so I'm here simply to mention that the council does attempt to pare those requests back. The council does recognize the financial circumstance, both of the state and of the local governments, and the challenges that you have there. The biggest impact of this bill, candidly, Mr. Chairman, and on the reduction to 2% of materials costs, is that the local governments would ask for less. And it's very straightforward. Where let's say let's just make up a project, and if it were at 2.76%, maybe the local governments get together and ask for 3 fire engines. If it's at 2%, they ask for 2 fire engines, and then the council decides whether or not those 2 fire engines are reasonable requests that should be supported with impact assistance payments. Again, local governments are asking for as very nearly, not completely, but very nearly as much as they reasonably can get, meaning the full, very nearly the full 2.76%. I don't blame them. That's just the way government works in a time of declining fiscal resources. Local governments have needs. These projects are often a drain on local resources, emergency providers, and the rest. And this is one vehicle to address those drains. And so I guess again, I don't want to call anybody out on the committee, but we've known each other for a while. Senator Kinski in particular has had a real concern over these numbers and has asked in past Appropriations Committee meetings, why is the Industrial Siting Council not being more frugal, if you will, with state funds? And again, we're trying to be. I'm on the losing end of quite a few votes on the Industrial Siting Council. I tend to go lower in terms of where I'd like to see the totals of the impact assistance payments being. But you have folks on the council that do weigh these requests carefully. It is a very imperfect process, as I believe it was Senator Boner described. It is very definitely imperfect, and we're hopefully getting better at it. But candidly, if legislators have a concern with the very large dollar amounts that are going out from the general fund to these local governments, there is one straightforward way of perhaps reducing that, and that is the 2% level. But as the testimony has been today, it's absolutely right. The council does have the ability to significantly reduce these impact assistance payments. The reality of the situation is that if you're starting from a lower threshold, for example, 2%, you probably will have less of an impact on the general fund. Thanks for letting me ramble, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Chris, for your service on the Industrial Siting Commission and your many years of service to the state. And my first question is, why do you look younger now than you did like last time I saw you?
Life is good, Mr. Chairman. I spent a lot more time outdoors and less time in dark rooms looking at TV cameras.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for Mr. Boswell? Chris, thanks so much, and thanks for taking your time to come and testify us today. Found your testimony very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Karen, is there anybody else in the waiting room?
No, sir.
All right, we'll go ahead and close off public testimony. Puts us back on the bill.
Move the bill.
The bill's been moved. Is there a second? Second by Senator Steinmetz. We're on the bill. Is there any discussion, or do you want to go straight? You want any particular amendments that you want to discuss?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I wish I had the amendment, that letter from Mr. Johnson and Mr. Levitt, so that I could track. I was interested in looking at some of those, but I wasn't able to catch all those notes. It might be better just to be a floor amendment if any of those really bear some merit.
I actually made some notes. I think I got most of them. If you want me to take you through them, Senator Kinski.
Sure.
As he talked, I think the first one really was the first amendment would be on line that he wanted was on line 3, page 3, lines 16 through 18, which was remove all the new language and reinsert the old language. That'd be amendment number 1 that he would want.
Okay, yeah, I don't want to make that one.
Okay, so then the second one is on page 4, at the end of line 5. He wanted to, after cities and towns, I think he would like a period and then delete the remainder of that sentence. So and any other equitable factor that would be deleted. That was another amendment that was suggested.
I was kind of inclined to agree with that one, Mr. Chairman, but Luke and Colin felt that it served a purpose. So we probably should have asked Mr. Boswell about that, because that you could drive a truck through any other equitable factor, several fire trucks.
Then the next one he talked about was at the bottom of page 5 on line 20. I think he gave us an option, but I think the one that makes the most sense is that you would after on line 20, after the word directly, you would insert or indirectly, the words or indirectly. So that would be that incurred by a county, city, or town directly or indirectly attributable to the construction of industrial facility. That was the other suggestion that he had. And then the last one was the one we kind of clarified later. And of course, there'd be conforming amendments in the other section.
Page 11.
The page 11, I think the easiest way is on line 5. You would strike approved insert the words for applications submitted. And so it would be, this act shall only apply to impact assessments for industrial facilities for applications submitted on or after the effective date of this act.
Yeah, I don't have interest in that one. I don't want to make that amendment.
Okay, so those are the ones that as he went through, I made note of. So.
And Jeremiah just sent them in. They're in your inbox.
Okay. So they're in your inbox if anybody's inclined to make those. So are there any other amendments? Or you ready for the question? You want to think about this for a second?
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's a bit of a quandary. I'm not the only one that's asked the questions on the committee, but the consternation I had initially was it just looked like virtually everything that was being submitted was being waved through. And I think I made the comment when this first came to us that I felt the burden was on the staff to promulgate regulations and to regulate the process. What do you need staff for if all they do is just stamp everything that comes in approved? And I know it wasn't quite that way, but it looked that way. And since that initial conversation, they have pared back a little bit in terms of what they've been granting. And so I'm reluctant to constrain the discretion too much, but I'm old enough to remember the origin of this, which was, Gillette. What was Gillette? It was a little spot in the road of 2,300 people. I know it wasn't 5,000 people when those booms hit, and they would just set trailers down in a cow pasture, and there was just no sort of infrastructure. And you'll recall Dr. Dean Kors coined the phrase, the Gillette syndrome, from the living conditions in that kind of boom. And that was the origin of the Industrial Siting Council. But these communities that are getting these impacts are much more mature than was the case back in the day. So I wonder if we're not overpaying for some of this assistance. And I think maybe this bill might be a fair compromise. It's just reducing the total amount of money available, but there's still a pretty good pot of money available. So I'm inclined to support it in its current form to get it out onto the floor. It's a debate I think needs to be had, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I would move one amendment, and I think the amendment that I would move, I would suggest is, or that I make, is on page 5, lines 20, and that would be on line after the word directly, insert or indirectly. I think that's my understanding of Industrial Siting Committee. It's not just these unmitigated impacts may be direct or they may be indirect.
Second.
Second. So any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. That one is passed unanimously. And that I don't have any other amendments that I would make to this bill right now. Are you ready for the question on the bill then?
Question.
All right, Karen, let's go ahead and take the roll on Senate File 82.
Senate File 82 as amended. Senator Guru.
Aye.
Senator Hicks.
No.
Senator Kinski.
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz.
Aye.
Chairman Perkins.
Aye.
4 ayes, 1 no.
All right, thank you. Senator Kinski, are you going to run this one? Or?
Well, I'd really rather not. I don't know that my heart is in it. I think you might have more enthusiastic champions on the committee. But you're the chairman. If you tell me to do it, I'll do it.
Well, let's see. So, yeah.
I'll do it.
Yeah, I'm sure you will, Mr. Vice President. We'll decline that invitation.
I'll do it.
Not
I'll
sure
take the
you
bullet
will.
for the team.
I'll go ahead and do it. Go ahead
Okay,
and put my
but
name down
we'll
on
be,
it.
we'll be there to help you.
I just want you to remember that I stepped up to the plate, Mr. Chairman.
I remember that.
I'm going to redo the seating chart in the Senate tomorrow.
Okay. And then Sherry, will you take 72? That's the financial counsel reporting budget reductions. And then Mr. Senator Rue, do you want to take Senate File 71? That's the strategic investments and projects account repeal. Or Mr. Vice President, do you want that one? That was kind of one you shepherded along.
Yeah, I think it was Larry's bill originally.
I would actually prefer my colleague from Teton County to do it, and I'll back him up.
Okay, all right. So let it be written. So, just showing our deferential attitude to you, Mr. Vice President.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sure it won't last long.
I think that concludes our agenda for Karen. Is there anything else? Don't forget to check in with Karen and fill in those votes on those other bills, Mr. Vice President.
Can I do that right now, Mr. President?
Sure, you bet.
Aye and aye.
Just to recap, Senator Hicks, for the financial accounting and reporting, Senate File 72, you're an aye.
Aye.
Okay. And for Senate File 71, strategic investments project account repeal, you're an aye as well.
Aye, aye.
Correct. Okay. With that in mind, Mr. Chairman, both Senate File 71 and 72 have 5 ayes.
All right. Thank you, Karen.
So, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about what on Monday, March 1, we're going to gavel in. You don't see any need for us to meet that morning, I would assume. We may get some afternoon or after adjournment, after recess work.
Right.
We're done with and we're done with JAC files. Do we have any other Senate Appropriations Committee files to be considered? I thought we were still had up in the air the prospect of a revival of the bill to say that the funding for the Senior Services at Home program would be subject to available funding. And maybe this is not the place to talk about that. I thought you were going to visit with our counterpart on the House side about that.
Yeah, and I haven't done that yet. There's all those bills that we did yesterday. Those will all be read in, and we'll have the ones that were signed to this made Senate files. We'll hear those fairly early, I would assume.
So to refresh your recollection on the Senior Services program, the bill that we had completely defunded it for anybody that wasn't Medicaid eligible. And that was a vote we lost with the House 7-5.
Right.
What we're talking about is reviving a bill that would just say that funding of the program is funded subject to available funds rather than just eliminating it entirely. And I don't know that that's been drafted, but if we have any interest in that, we've got to get a drafting request in. What's our deadline to have bill draft requests into LSO?
It's
next
week.
The 25th, doesn't it?
I believe it's the 2nd or 3rd.
Yeah.
Third, I think.
So but you're absolutely right. They didn't, yeah, yeah, it's one we ought to do. I don't know if it, whether we do it this year or next year, but it needs to get done.
Do we need to do this to enact the budget reductions that the governor had recommended, though, or not?
That's the question.
Well, I mean, what you would have, yes, you would, but if the House isn't going to make the reduction, but in preparation, if they don't make it this year, if you're going to make it in the future, you still have to have that bill has to get passed sometime.
So real quick, Mr. Chairman, Karen, are we still streaming or not? Are we adjourned?
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and adjourn and we can visit for a second, just